Hi, everybody. So in this lecture, we're going to be looking at causal arguments and just sort of looking at an example of how to look at an article in terms of, what it's doing as a causal argument. So remember that causal arguments look at the cause of various things. And a lot of the time we use these to help us inform our decisions, big decisions and small ones. They're often a part of a bigger argument or a larger conversation, and there are lots of different types. So there's some that look at a cause and then examine the effects. There's some that start with the effects and then trace those back to a cause or their causes. And then there's also some that look at how various things impact or cause one another. One sort of hallmark of causal arguments is that they're always complex because when we look at a cause of a particular thing, generally speaking, there isn't just one thing that contributes to something happening, right? So this chart looks at just a few things that can cause cancer, for instance, right? So when we're looking at causal arguments, we want to make sure that we're looking at lots of different contributing factors. So for this particular lecture, we're going to be practicing with one of the articles that we read, which is Little Girls or Little Women. The author of this article examines how popular culture, in particular how Disney princesses, can cause some negative things for young girls. So if you look at this example from the text, she doesn't just say Disney princesses, make girls focus on their bodies, for instance. Instead, she claims that Disney princesses can contribute to lots of different things, right? So she says that it is not only that, they're kind of influenced by these things a lot when they're little, but that it also is the first step down a path to scarier challenges, including things like self-objectification, cyberbullying, and unhealthy body images. And then, of course, in the article, she goes on to discuss those things, more in depth. So that's just one type of causal argument, right? Where she's looking at not only is this a problem when they're young, but this is a problem that leads to other problems later. So again, complexity. So remember that they are complex types of arguments. It's more than just cause and effect. And we often also look at various opinions within these arguments, right? So you might see varying opinions, people who agree and disagree throughout the article or the talk if you're looking at a TED Talk. So here, the author acknowledges that this theory is not universal. Lots of people don't see any problem with this, or they see that there, maybe is a problem, but it's not something to take very seriously. So acknowledging, that not everybody agrees is another thing that a good causal argument is going to do. Just like any other argument, of course, a causal argument will use lots of different evidence. So we should see various types of evidence that are supporting these claims. And of course, it should come from multiple and reputable sources. So in this particular article, we can see that this author is citing other authors. She's letting us know that this is another prominent, person in this field who has something to say about the subject and is an expert in the field. She's written a book, she works at a college, and so on, right? And then from here, if you look throughout the article, again, you'll see lots of different places where outside evidence is used, and it is from, multiple different sources. So that's another good example of how a causal argument should be using evidence. Another thing that causal arguments often do is to get the reader or the audience invested, right? We definitely want to understand as an audience why we should care about this particular thing. So they might establish why we should care about the effects being discussed by providing evidence of the problem. So these are two screenshots from the article. And this is just one example of how we sort of have that buy-in with this article. So the first step is to understand why any of this matters, right? And then they argue that this matters because there are some problems with the progress towards gender equity. And they use athletics as one example, but then later in the article, they also go on to talk about this in academics and in other settings, right? So the author isn't just saying, here's why this matters and one reason, but instead, they're looking at lots of different ways in which this matters. And the hope there is that their audience will understand and sort of, identify with at least one of those things so that we can see why we should care about this issue. So, a quick recap of causal arguments. Remember, they have lots of different purposes. They're very complex. They're often a part of another larger argument. And things like effective evidence and sound reasoning are still important, just like they are, in any other type of argument. And then I just had to include the Disney princess meme because we're talking about Disney princesses this week. So Disney taught me that the best way to express sadness is to throw yourself on the nearest object and dramatically sob. Right? The author of this particular article probably would agree and have some things to say about it, but it's still funny. All right, so that is a very brief introduction to and practice with causal arguments. Of course, you'll be practicing more with your assignments for class. You should be working on this in your groups, and you should also get tutoring if you're having a hard time.